new exclusive photographs, by far the best yet, are in from the Titanic. For most of this century, that huge passenger liner has been a dead ship. Now, scientists have even seen the iceberg damage that doomed the Titanic.
The Titanic is one of history's most famous disasters. But its story goes far beyond icebergs and sinking decks. Hidden within the tragedy are shocking secrets, incredible acts of courage, and strange details few have heard.
On April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg during its maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, it sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
From passengers surviving unimaginable odds to mysterious forces quietly at work beneath the ocean, these 20 weird facts reveal unexpected sides of the legendary ship. Some stories are heartbreaking, others astonishing, and a few will leave you questioning how such a massive, luxurious vessel could meet such a sudden and tragic fate. Chief Baker's daring life-saving efforts. Charles Jochen, the chief baker of the Titanic, realized immediately the seriousness of the situation when the Titanic hit the iceberg. He mobilized his team to assist in the loading of the lifeboats and made it a point that food was taken out for the escapees to the deck. A couple of 4 loaves of bread were assigned to each lifeboat to keep the passengers at sea for some time. Jochen was originally supposed to be in charge of lifeboat number 10, but by the time he showed up, it was already being taken care of by others. During the disaster, Jochen started to drink a lot of whiskey, which was very unexpected, but later became a positive thing since he was able to withstand the freezing water. He kept on helping in any way possible, throwing deck chairs into the ocean so they could be used as makeshift flotation devices for whoever had to jump into the water. The ocean liner's complete rotation caused Jochen to remain on the ship till the very last moment, still clinging to the railing, which had already been his support. He went under the freezing Atlantic Ocean and managed to live for the next 2 hours, much longer than the combined survival time of most passengers. Then he saw a lifeboat that had turned over, and there were around 25 men on it, and still, the one next to the boat was the only spot available for him to hold on to until another one came for him. He fought through it all and was still left with just swollen feet, hence becoming one of the most remarkable survivors of the Titanic. Hold on to your hats. What happened next shocked everyone back home. Early news of the Titanic disaster. The very first news stories about the Titanic disaster were wrong and puzzling at the same time, which was a consequence of the limited communication technology at that time. On April 15, 1912, the Daily Mail, which was then a famous newspaper, published the story after just 2 days the ship sank, and the report mistakenly estimated the Titanic's death toll, thus fueling the misinformation by exaggerating the number of survivors and the fatalities. Several newspapers, among them the Washington Post, got their stories from the Titanic's twin ship, the RMS Olympic, which had rescued some people. The reports were a mixture of truth and guesswork, since there was no communication to confirm the full extent of the disaster. The reporters could not break through the wall of myths and the rumors of the time, thus giving rise to different accounts regarding the number of people who had died. The mistakes that were made can be justified by the time period. The delivery of news was a slow process, and the means of communication that did not use wires were at a very early stage. Due to the public's interest and demand, the editors often published any information that was available, thinking it would be enough. Nevertheless, the errors helped the public to be confused and disbelieving. A lot of people were in the situation of not being able to even think that such a disaster could take place on the unsinkable Titanic. With the passage of time, more reliable reports came out correcting the early mistakes. However, these first news stories are yet to reflect how the limitations of technology and human errors dictated the public's perception of one of the most famous maritime tragedies in history. Titanic band plays until the end. When the Titanic struck the iceberg and began to sink, the ship's band became a lasting symbol of courage and calm. The captain ordered the musicians to play to keep the passengers calm as lifeboats were being loaded. Despite the growing panic, the music helped many people remain composed during those terrifying moments. As the situation worsened and the deck tilted, the band members initially prepared to stop playing and save themselves. However, they soon changed their minds, realizing their music could bring peace and dignity in the face of tragedy. They gathered again on deck and continued performing even as the cold water rose around them. The group's captain was Wallace Hartley, and he was accompanied by Theodore Brayley, Roger Bracu, John Clark, John Hume, George Crins, Percy Taylor, and John Woodward. The last pieces they played were hymns and waltzes, and among the witnesses, the last one was remembered as "Nearer, My God, to Thee." That night, the entire ensemble perished, and the fate of some of them remains unknown, including whether their bodies were never found. Their valor made them immortal, being remembered not only as instrumentalists, but also as brave men who, during one of the darkest nights in history, chose compassion instead of life. Titanic's lifeboat shortage tragedy. One of the most tragic facts about the Titanic disaster was the severe shortage of lifeboats. Although the ship was large enough to carry 64 lifeboats, the designers chose to include only 20. They believed the ship was practically unsinkable, so they did not want to use valuable deck space for additional boats. This fatal decision left hundreds of passengers without any chance of rescue when the ship went down. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, the captain ordered passengers to prepare for evacuation, but it quickly became clear there were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Crew members tried to keep people calm while filling the boats, but confusion and disbelief spread. Many passengers hesitated to leave the unsinkable ship, wasting precious time. The situation was made worse by the fact that the majority of the lifeboats were launched with only a few people on board. The capacity of each lifeboat ranged from 40 to 65 persons, but a few of them had only around 20 passengers. The main reasons for the huge loss of life were fear, disorganization, and lack of training. Thus, more than 1,500 people perished, mainly from drowning or freezing in the frigid water. The lifeboat shortage was one of the principal causes of the substantial loss of life, and it eventually brought about major changes in maritime law regarding safety standards. Evacuating Titanic. Orders amid chaos. After the Titanic struck the iceberg, Captain Edward John Smith immediately ordered the crew to prepare the lifeboats and begin evacuating passengers. His main goal was to keep everyone calm and avoid panic while assessing the ship's damage. At first, many passengers did not realize the severity of the situation, as the ship seemed stable. To maintain order, the captain instructed the band to play music while lifeboats were prepared. The evacuation followed the traditional "women and children first" rule. Crew members began loading lifeboats accordingly, but because there was no previous lifeboat drill, confusion spread quickly. Many passengers did not know where to go or how to board, and some resisted leaving the ship, still believing the Titanic could not sink. The officers and crew members were operating under very tense conditions, attempting to control scared people and lower the lifeboats at the same time. The more the ship leaned, the more unorderly the evacuation was. The decks were taken over by people, and several boats were released with a lot number of passengers than they could carry. Though the crew did their best to save lives, still, a lot of people could not get to a lifeboat before it was too late. When the Titanic sank at last, hundreds of people were left in the icy water, still and waiting for the rescue that was already too late. Romance amid Titanic's chaos. Among the many passengers on the Titanic were several honeymooning couples eager to begin their new lives together. One of the most well-known pairs was Victor and Maria Pinasco Acosta, a wealthy couple from Spain. They chose the Titanic for their honeymoon voyage, hoping to enjoy the luxury of the world's finest ocean liner on their way to New York. Victor had inherited a large fortune from his family, and the trip was meant to be a celebration of their marriage. Victor went out to check the situation after the ship collided with the Iceberg, and soon knew the risk. He went back to their room and told Maria to dress without delay. Victor became their husband, and the maid helped him go to the lifeboat number 8. He saw them safe and then went back to the deck. Unfortunately, he never reached a lifeboat, and his remains were never found. John and Nella Snyder, another honeymoon couple, were in their early 20s. They had more luck. Both came out alive after being rescued into a lifeboat with women and children. Nella lived until she was 93, but John died when he was 71. Their love story is always associated with one of the greatest catastrophes in history. Titanic's lifeboat drill was cancelled. On the very day the Titanic struck the iceberg, a lifeboat drill had been scheduled for the passengers and crew. Such drills were standard practice on ocean liners to ensure that everyone knew how to respond in an emergency. However, for unknown reasons, Captain Edward John Smith decided to cancel the drill that Sunday, April 14, 1912. No official explanation was ever recorded, though some believe it was because of calm weather or a desire not to alarm the passengers. This decision would later prove disastrous. Despite reports of ice in the water from nearby ships that day, the crew and passengers were unprepared when tragedy struck. Without the drill, few people knew their designated stations or how to properly board the lifeboats once the evacuation began. The moment the iceberg hit, chaos broke out immediately. Most of the people on board had no clue which way to go, while others were using the lifeboats incorrectly, or there were not enough people. The disorganization among the crew delayed the rescue operation, taking away the minutes that could have made the difference between life and death. Looking back, the scrapped lifeboat drill turned out to be one of the Titanic's darkest hours, a trivial decision that indirectly led to the death of more than 1,500 people that night. The unsinkable myth. When the Titanic was built, it was famously described as unsinkable. Engineers and the public believed its advanced design made it the safest ship ever constructed. The confidence came from its watertight compartments, separated by bulkheads that could be sealed off if the hull was damaged. Because of this design, many thought that even if several compartments flooded, the ship would still stay afloat. However, this belief was tragically false. The watertight bulkheads did not extend high enough, allowing water to spill from one compartment to another once the ship began to tilt forward. This design flaw caused the Titanic to become too heavy on one side, dragging it deeper into the ocean with every passing minute. The myth of being unsinkable also had an impact on safety choices. Because the vessel was thought to be nearly indestructible, the makers decided to put in just 20 lifeboats instead of 64, and thus they saved both deck space and the ship's classy look. At the moment the Titanic hit the ice mountain, the mirage of security disappeared right away. The ocean liner that was not to sink did sink, which was proof that overconfidence and false reliance on technology could bring even the most glorious creations to their death. Titanic's fatal watertight compartment flaw. One of the most critical reasons the Titanic sank so quickly was a flaw in its watertight compartment design. The ship was divided into 16 compartments, each intended to contain flooding if the hull was breached. This innovative feature led many to believe the Titanic was virtually unsinkable. However, the compartments were not completely sealed at the top, which made all the difference when disaster struck. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, it ripped open several sections along the starboard side. Water immediately began flooding into the first few compartments, and as the bow dipped lower, the water spilled over the tops of the bulkheads into the next ones. This cascading effect made it impossible to stop the flooding, even though only part of the hull was damaged. The ship's weight was greatly concentrated at the front as more compartments were filled, which led the ship to sink deeper into the sea, and consequently, more of the hull was exposed to water coming in. The engineers and crew were just spectators to the downfall of the unsinkable ship. Titanic's size. When completed in 1912, the Titanic was the largest and most luxurious passenger ship ever built, measuring 882 feet and 9 inches, about the length of 2 football fields. Weighing 50,310 tons, it was the heaviest ocean liner of its time, showcasing the peak of early 20th century engineering and ambition. The vessel was a luxurious structure on water, consisting of 9 decks, magnificent staircases, sumptuous dining rooms, and stylish cabins, to be seen not only as a mighty but also a very luxurious ship. The whole world was talking about the ship's huge size, and it would probably sink to the bottom. Nevertheless, the dimensions of the Titanic were a mixed blessing. They were quite awe-inspiring, but at the same time difficult to handle, and thus the ship could not turn fast enough to avoid the iceberg, which decided its fate. Its size was really both its splendor and its disaster, a clear indication of how even human engineering miracles could be defeated by nature's powers. Don't blink, because the next detail is on a whole other level. Titanic's 2-hour, 40-minute descent. It took the Titanic 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink completely after striking the iceberg. The collision occurred late on the night of April 14, 1912, and by the early hours of April 15, 1912, the great ship had vanished beneath the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean. Despite the severe damage, the Titanic did not sink immediately, giving passengers and crew a limited but crucial window of time to respond. At first, many people did not realize how serious the situation was. The ship was so large that the impact seemed minor to most on board. However, as the lower compartments began to flood and the bow dipped lower, the danger became unmistakable. The crew began loading lifeboats, though confusion and disbelief slowed the evacuation. The slow sinking still permitted some to get off the ship. However, the shortage of lifeboats meant more than 1,500 people lost their lives. With the ship's angle becoming steeper, launching lifeboats got more difficult, and disorder spread on the decks. By 2:20 a.m., the Titanic's power was cut. The ship was fractured, and it went down invisibly into the icy water. The placid sea of the night turned unquiet, and thus the largest ship ever manufactured came to its demise. Fatal iceberg tears ship's hull. The disaster of the Titanic began with its collision with an iceberg late on the night of April 14, 1912. As the ship sailed through the North Atlantic, lookouts spotted the iceberg too late to avoid impact. Despite the Titanic's massive size, it could not maneuver quickly enough to steer clear. The iceberg tore a long gash along the starboard side, puncturing multiple compartments and allowing water to flood the hull. Immediately after the collision, Captain Edward John Smith and the ship's designers assessed the damage. They realized that water was spilling over the watertight bulkheads, moving from one compartment to the next. This meant that the ship would inevitably sink, as the flooding could not be contained. The crew began issuing orders to prepare for evacuation and load lifeboats. The iceberg collision was unexpected, but very damaging. The passengers at first did not realize the extent of the damage because the Titanic had been stable for a little while. But when the bow went down and water came in, panic broke out slowly, thus making it clear that the crew urgently needed to control the situation and maintain order. In the end, the iceberg collision determined the destiny of the Titanic. The giant vessel, which had been considered unsinkable, was mortally wounded, and thus the sequence of events leading to the death of more than 1,500 people in the icy North Atlantic started. Hypothermia slays in minutes. One of the most fatal factors during the Titanic tragedy was the very cold water of the North Atlantic. The ocean temperature was only 28 degrees Fahrenheit or -2 degrees Celsius. The Titanic sank on April 14th to 15th, 1912, night far below freezing. For those who accidentally fell into the water, survival was a question of minutes, as they would immediately get hypothermic. The cold ocean water made the bodies lose heat very quickly, which in turn caused shock, loss of control of muscles, and even coma within a very short time. Even the most capable swimmers could not live long in these conditions because the freezing temperature defeated the body's capacity to retain heat. A lot of passengers who managed to get out of the ship itself still perished in the water, which pointed out that falling into the Atlantic Ocean was pretty much life-threatening, no matter how close one was to a lifeboat. Lifeboat occupants did not escape the risk either. The deck of a lifeboat was rendered unsafe by the combination of cold spray and the icy winds. Crew members attempted to help by giving blankets and making passengers walk, but the very harshness of the environment continued to contribute to the total number of deaths. The terrible weather was the main factor in the extinction of more than 1,500 people on that night. Although there were lifeboats and rescue operations, the freezing Atlantic was a merciless power that transformed a maritime disaster into one of the most lethal in history. Titanic found. After 73 years, the Titanic sank in 1912, and for decades it was a lost ship that was lying on the seabed as if it were dead and had nothing to say. The wreck of the ship lay hidden for 73 years until it was near the end of the search of a French and American team that was looking south of Newfoundland when it was finally found in 1985. The expedition confirmed the location of the legendary liner, which provided long-sought answers about its final resting place. There were 3 separate search teams before this discovery that all tried to locate the Titanic and ended up with no luck in their attempts. The size of the ship, the depth of the North Atlantic, and the harsh ocean conditions all combined to create a situation where finding it was next to impossible. The probe unveiled some astonishing details about the ship's state after more than 70 years of being on the ocean floor. Pictures and videos assisted in the documentation and provided historians and scientists with a view of the disaster, which consisted of a decayed hull, distorted iron, and scattered artifacts. Finding the Titanic was a big milestone in underwater archaeology. It didn't just solve one of the greatest mysteries of the century, but also revived people's interest in the ship's saga, which in turn resulted in a plethora of documentaries, books, and research works that, through time, kept one of the greatest disasters at sea in history still remembered. Bathtubs highlight Titanic's social divide. The Titanic was famous for its luxury, but the level of comfort varied greatly between passenger classes. First-class passengers enjoyed private baths in their cabins, reflecting the high standards of wealth and refinement aboard the ship. Each suite had its own amenities, including a bathtub in the salon, which was part of the lavish experience promised to the wealthiest travelers. In stark contrast, third-class passengers faced much harsher conditions. There were only 2 bathtubs available for 700 passengers, meaning access was extremely limited. Most third-class travelers had to use shared or improvised washing facilities, far removed from the privacy and convenience afforded to the upper-class passengers. These contrasts emphasize the strict social hierarchy of the era, which even affected hygiene. On the one hand, first-class passengers experienced elegance and comfort, while on the other hand, the majority of the travelers went through overcrowded and less hygienic situations. This disparity reached its peak during the calamity because class also determined the accessibility to lifeboats and the help of crew members. The differentiation between the luxurious first class and the miserable third class served as a pointer to the social distinctions of the early 20th century. Even on a single vessel, the wealth not only dictated the degree of comfort, but also, unfortunately, the survival rate in the course of the Titanic sinking. Titanic's wealthiest passenger perishes. The richest man aboard the Titanic was John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time. He was worth $87 million in 1912, roughly equivalent to $2.6 billion today. Astor was traveling with his young 18-year-old wife, Madeline, who was pregnant with their child. Astor and Madeline had been on a grand tour of Europe and Egypt before boarding the Titanic to return to the United States. His presence on the ship symbolized the wealth and luxury that the Titanic represented as he traveled in first class, enjoying all the opulent amenities the ship had to offer. When the calamity came, Astor saw to it that his spouse occupied a place in a lifeboat. As per reports, he remained on the vessel, putting her safety first before his own. Unfortunately, John Jacob Astor lost his life, and his corpse was recovered afterward, while Madeline lived and shortly after gave birth to their son. Astor's narrative shows both the human loss and the wealth disparity that were present on the Titanic. The richest person could not dodge the disaster, thereby showing that being upper class could bring some solace, but not protection from the elements. Young lives lost at sea. Among the most heart-wrenching stories from the Titanic disaster are those of the terrified little girls who were caught in the chaos as the ship sank. Many children were separated from their families or lost in the crowded decks, struggling to find a lifeboat or hold on to a parent in the panic. A large number of young girls did not survive the disaster, highlighting the tragedy's human cost. Some of the children were able to board lifeboats alongside women, as crew members followed the women and children first rule. However, lifeboats were often underfilled, and many little girls had to cling to the edges or wait helplessly while the boats were lowered into the water. The frigid Atlantic made survival in the water nearly impossible for anyone, let alone small children. Numerous young girls' bodies have never been recovered, which means their family members are still awaiting closure, and the extent of the loss is still being emphasized. To be exact, from the over 1,500 victims, only 306 bodies were found, and a huge part of the missing ones were children. The accounts of scared little girls are a very sad reminder of the disaster's most defenseless victims. Their terror and powerlessness reveal the human aspect of the Titanic catastrophe, thus transforming it into a touching lesson in both bravery and weakness. Heroes who stayed behind the Titanic. The Titanic disaster revealed extraordinary heroism and self-sacrifice among passengers and crew. Many men gave up their spots in lifeboats so women and children could escape, despite the freezing North Atlantic and slim chances of survival for those who stayed behind. John Jacob Astor IV is a notable example, ensuring his wife, Madeline, reached a lifeboat before remaining on the ship himself. Countless other men and crew made the same choice, prioritizing others over their own lives. Heroism was likewise seen in the form of quick thinking and improvisation. The main pastry chef, Charles Jogan, provided flotation devices for the passengers and assisted the lifeboats in getting food supplied. The ship's musicians played until the very end, giving the audience serenity along with their music in a very dreadful circumstance. These deeds exemplify the highest qualities of mankind: love, valor, and generosity, even in the case of the most fatal sea disaster in history, proving that tragedy can still bring out exceptional heroism. Survivor faces Titanic after previous shipwreck. One of the most remarkable Titanic stories is that of Raymond, a passenger who had already survived a previous ship disaster. In 1871, he was aboard a vessel traveling to Montevideo, Uruguay, when a boiler explosion caused a fire and sinking. Out of 164 passengers, only 65 survived, and Raymond escaped by jumping into the ocean and swimming to safety. In 1912, Raymond, after 41 years, finally decided to face his fears and get a ticket to the Titanic, maybe for the sake of getting over it, or simply for the adventure. He took the luxury liner without knowing that the same fate might happen to him. Even though he was emotionally disturbed, he did not give up on his goal of making it back home safely. Raymond was once more thrown into a sinking ship's chaos when the Titanic hit the iceberg. He was very fortunate this time, too, and he survived a second maritime tragedy, albeit in a horrifying situation that was separated by decades. Raymond's tale serves as a reminder of the unpredictability of life at sea and the great persistence of people who go through disasters more than once. His survival interlinks two different catastrophes in one personal history in a unique way. Keep your eyes peeled. Our top pick is absolutely astonishing. Rust-eating bacteria destroy the Titanic. The Titanic, once the world's grandest ship, will not last forever on the ocean floor. Scientists have discovered bacteria slowly consuming the wreck, feeding on the iron in its hull and forming fragile rust-like structures called rusticles. These Bonneries rust-eating bacteria are gradually breaking down the ship, and experts estimate that within 20 years, the remaining structure could be gone, leaving only sediment behind. The gradual deterioration of the Titanic is a clear sign of nature's power over man-made structures. Even the biggest ones are not forever. Although the Titanic went down in a matter of hours after the collision with the iceberg, nature has been quietly working to destroy it bit by bit for more than 100 years now. Ultimately, the Titanic will turn into a mere ghost, becoming unrecognizable, and now only the smallest of remains will be left. The narrative will continue through pieces, pictures, and written histories, thus providing ways to remember and reminding us of one of the most famous maritime disasters in history, and, at the same time, the powerful forces of the natural world that cannot be stopped. The Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a stage for heroism, mystery, and unexpected stories that continue to captivate the world. From astonishing survival tales to surprising facts about the ship itself, these moments remind us how remarkable and tragic that night truly was. If you enjoyed these incredible Titanic facts, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing stories. Don't miss the next video. Click it on the screen now to uncover even more jaw-dropping secrets.